The Taliban are known worldwide for war, terror, and extreme control. But behind the commanders and fighters were women, wives who lived hidden lives, often trapped, sometimes punished, and at times killed. They lived in silence, bound to men who ruled through fear. Yet they carried their own private wars inside their homes. For some, their final moments came in the shadows, violent, merciless, and forgotten. When the Taliban took control of Kabul in September 1996, Afghanistan changed overnight. The movement, born in religious schools in Pakistan and shaped by years of war, claimed it would bring peace after the chaos of the civil war. But peace came at the cost of freedom, especially for women. The Taliban enforced their vision of Sharia law through a brutal system of religious policing, run by the Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. Their rules dictated nearly every aspect of life, and punishment was immediate, often violent. Women bore the harshest burden. They were banned from going to school, holding jobs, or even appearing in public without a male guardian. The chadri, a full-body veil with only a small mesh opening for the eyes, became mandatory. Many families could not afford one since the price of a burqa had skyrocketed as demand exploded. Enforcement was cruel. Women without one risked being whipped in the streets. Some accounts describe women having their ankles beaten with sticks if even a glimpse of skin was showed beneath the fabric. Speaking softly in public, laughing, or walking alone could bring punishment from the religious police, who patrolled the streets armed with whips and rifles. For any mother whose child fell sick late at night, without a husband, brother, or son to escort her, she faced a cruel choice of risking going outside alone and being beaten, or letting her child suffer without medical care. Some chose to risk it, and paid with their lives. Human rights reports describe cases where women desperate to reach a doctor were stopped, assaulted, or even shot by guards for violating the rules. One woman carrying her feverish infant was shot at close range by a Taliban fighter. She and her baby barely survived because neighbors carried them away and hid them. Stories like this spread fear through communities, leaving many women trapped indoors, even during emergencies. Education collapsed almost instantly. In 1996, most teachers in Afghanistan were women. And when the Taliban banned girls' schools, they dismissed these teachers as well. This meant boys' education also suffered, since there were not enough male teachers to fill the gap. UNICEF estimated that by 2000, fewer than 5% of Afghan girls were receiving any formal schooling. Boys' literacy rates also dropped. Teachers who tried to continue classes in secret were at constant risk. Even women in powerful households were not spared. Wives of Taliban leaders lived in guarded compounds where windows were painted over or covered with sheets so no one could see inside. They were forbidden from speaking to servants, neighbors, or anyone outside their immediate family. Strict household rules banned jewelry, music, photographs, or laughter that could be heard beyond the walls. In some cases, even female relatives of Taliban officials had to ask permission to step outside the compound. Isolation was total, and many of these women lived in silence and depression, with little escape from their confinement. But their suffering did not go unseen. The Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, RAWA, smuggled cameras into Kabul, risking death to film public executions, beatings, and floggings carried out in stadiums. They carried this footage to Pakistan, where it was published in underground newspapers and later shared online, becoming some of the first visual evidence of Taliban brutality seen by the outside world. Their secret reports documented how women were stoned to death for adultery, executed for alleged immorality, and whipped in public for showing their wrists or wearing shoes that made noise when walking. By 2001, 5 years of Taliban rule had left Afghanistan in ruins, not only in war, but in human dignity. Families starved as widows unable to work struggled to feed their children. When the Taliban lost Kabul in late 2001, everything changed overnight. Their fighters dropped their weapons, their leaders disappeared into the mountains, and their system of control collapsed. But their wives and children still carried the burden of survival. Wherever the men went, to caves in Kandahar, to tribal villages in Helmand, or across the border into Pakistan, their families followed into exile and uncertainty. For many, Pakistan became the first refuge. Cities like Quetta and Peshawar were filled with refugees from Afghanistan, and among them were Taliban families trying to blend in. They hid in plain sight, renting small homes or staying in secret safe houses paid for by Taliban sympathizers. These safe houses were often cramped with multiple families living under one roof, always keeping the curtains drawn and their voices low. The women rarely left. When they did, they wore heavy veils and kept silent, afraid that even a wrong accent or a single careless word could expose them. Life in hiding meant constant movement. The Taliban leadership rarely stayed in one place, and wives were often left behind in unfamiliar neighborhoods, waiting for secret messages to arrive. Families were sometimes split apart for months or even years. Children grew up not knowing if their fathers were alive or dead. Mothers, often young and inexperienced, were left to manage everything while their husbands moved between compounds to avoid drone strikes and raids. Some women attempted to move between Afghanistan and Pakistan to reunite with their husbands. They often relied on smugglers, bribed border guards, or carried forged papers. If caught, the consequences were interrogation, detention, or being handed over to Afghan or U.S. intelligence. For women raised in strict Taliban households, suddenly being forced to navigate these dangerous crossings with children was terrifying. Meanwhile, the war followed them everywhere. U.S. and Afghan forces were actively targeting Taliban commanders, and wives often became indirect victims. Night raids meant doors kicked in without warning, homes torn apart, and women left terrified. The children suffered in silence. Many never attended regular schools since it was too risky to register their names. Instead, they studied in secret madrasas tied to Taliban networks or were taught at home in whispers. Growing up in hiding, they learned early that survival meant silence. Some became messengers, carrying notes or money because adults drew too much suspicion. By the mid-2000s, entire generations of Taliban children were being shaped by this hidden existence. This era became known as the Taliban's Shadow War. While the men fought gun battles in the mountains or directed insurgency from the background, their wives and children lived another kind of war. For years, U.S. officials believed that if they wanted to weaken the Taliban, they had to go after their leaders in their safe havens. These included Pakistan's tribal areas, like South and North Waziristan, which were rugged, full of mountains, valleys, and mud-walled villages. They were places where the Pakistani army often struggled to go, but where Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters found perfect hideouts. So by 2009, drone strikes had become the main weapon the United States relied on in these areas. One of the leaders was Baitullah Masood, the most powerful commander of the Pakistani Taliban. He had risen to power quickly after 2004 and built a fearsome reputation. His group carried out bombings in big cities like Islamabad, Lahore, and Peshawar. They targeted police stations, army checkpoints, and even crowded markets. Suicide attacks became his signature weapon. Between 2007 and 2009, hundreds of Pakistanis died in attacks linked to his network. The Pakistani government called him their enemy number one, and Washington placed a $5 million bounty on his head. But the crime that made him most infamous was the assassination of Benazir Bhutto in December 2007. She had just returned from exile and was seen as Pakistan's hope for democracy. When she was killed in Rawalpindi after a rally, suspicion immediately fell on Baitullah Masood, though he denied it. Intelligence reports suggested his men were behind the plot. That single act turned him into a top target for both Pakistan and the United States. By the summer of 2009, Masood was seriously ill. He was believed to have kidney problems, and some reports said he was diabetic. Unable to move much, he was staying at his father-in-law's compound in the small village of Zangra in South Waziristan. His young wife was taking care of him during this time, staying close to his bedside. On the night of August 5th, 2009, an American drone appeared in the sky above Zangra. These drones were controlled from thousands of miles away, often from U.S. bases in Nevada. Pilots and analysts watched real-time video feeds as the aircraft hovered over suspected militant hideouts. Once intelligence confirmed that Masood was inside, the drone fired 2 Hellfire missiles directly at the compound. The missiles struck with deadly precision. The first explosion tore through the main building, while the second ensured total destruction. The roof collapsed instantly, burying everyone inside under heavy debris. Baitullah Masood died where he lay, unable to escape. His wife, who had been caring for him, was killed right beside him. Reports later said she had no chance of survival, as the roof crushed her almost instantly. Her name was never made public, and almost nothing about her life became known outside her family circle. In many tribal traditions, the identities of women were kept private, and so she remained nameless in official records. But even without a name, her death carried a huge symbolic weight. She became the first known Taliban leader's wife confirmed to be killed in a U.S. drone strike. For the United States, the killing of Masood was a major success. His death was celebrated in Washington as a huge victory against terrorism. But for the Taliban, it was both a loss and a warning. By 2016, another name became one of the most feared in Pakistan and Afghanistan: Mullah Fazlullah. He was not just another Taliban commander. He had once ruled an entire valley. In the Swat Valley, between 2007 and 2009, he had enforced his control with extreme brutality. He banned music, forced men to grow beards, destroyed video shops, and most famously, shut down schools for girls. His radio broadcasts earned him the nickname Mullah Radio because night after night he used the airwaves to threaten opponents and spread propaganda. Ordinary villagers lived in fear of his orders, knowing that disobedience could lead to public executions or whippings. Because of this, he quickly rose to the top of Pakistan's most wanted list. When he fled Swat after the Pakistani military's major operation in 2009, he rebuilt his forces across the border in Afghanistan. From there, he planned bombings, attacks on security forces, and even the shocking assassination attempt on Malala Yousafzai in 2012. By 2013, he was officially named the head of the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, making him one of the most dangerous men in the region. The United States and Pakistan both dedicated enormous resources to hunting him down. Drone strikes targeted his hideouts in the tribal areas of Pakistan and in eastern Afghanistan. Rumors of his death surfaced almost every year, only for him to reappear. He became known as a figure who could somehow escape even the most precise attacks. It was during one of these airstrikes in 2016 that reports emerged about his wife. Local media outlets claimed that she had been inside a compound when the bombs fell. Initial reports said she had died alongside other family members. Pakistani newspapers and television repeated the story with confidence, and many believed it was true. After all, the wives of Taliban leaders usually shared their husbands' hiding places, and when the men were targeted, their families often suffered the same fate. For a while, her death was taken as fact. Analysts and officials cited it as another example of the collateral damage that came with drone warfare. Some even speculated that the loss might weaken Fazlullah's resolve, as many militant leaders had reacted strongly when family members were killed. But behind the headlines, the truth was far more complicated. A year later, in August 2017, her name surfaced in an unexpected place. A Taliban women's magazine called Sunat-e-Kaula published an interview with her. The magazine itself was a rare and disturbing publication. It was designed specifically for women within extremist circles, encouraging them to support the Taliban cause. Inside its pages, her story appeared in detail. She described her marriage to Fazlullah, the difficulties of life in hiding, and how she managed to continue her duties as a wife and mother despite constant relocations. This interview was a shock. Not only did it prove that she was alive, but it also revealed how deeply involved she was in the Taliban's world. In August 2021, women found themselves at risk again when the Taliban swept back into power after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Within days, Kabul fell, and the old fears of the 1990s returned. Families feared that their daughters would be taken by Taliban officials as wives, a practice the group had carried out during its earlier rule. For Afghan families, this fear was not imagined. Reports began to surface from provinces such as Takhar, Kunduz, and Ghor that Taliban commanders were compiling lists of unmarried women between the ages of 15 and 45. These lists were often delivered to village elders with orders that daughters must be handed over. Families who refused faced threats and, in some cases, beatings or imprisonment. In rural areas where Taliban power was absolute, many women were forced into marriages with fighters as a way of securing loyalty or rewarding soldiers for their service. One of the most disturbing and well-documented cases happened just a few months later. It involved a young woman named Elaha, a 25-year-old medical student from Kabul. She was not an ordinary citizen. She was the daughter of General Abdul Rahman Rahmani, a high-ranking officer in the Afghan Air Force who had worked closely with the U.S. military. This connection made her a target. For the Taliban, forcing a woman like her into marriage was not only about control, but it was about humiliating the families of former officials who had resisted them. In January 2022, Taliban intelligence agents abducted her. She was forced to marry Qari Saeed Kosti, a former spokesman for the Taliban's Interior Ministry. Kosti was a powerful man within the new regime, and Elaha had no way to resist. She was cut off from her family and stripped of her freedom. What made her case even more shocking was the fact that she came from a respected and educated background. She had dreamed of finishing her studies in medicine, but now she was reduced to living as a prisoner inside the home of a Taliban commander. Her story spread in August 2022 when she managed to record videos and share them with activists. In the videos, she showed the bruises on her face and the scars across her body. For a woman in Afghanistan, this was almost unthinkable. The Taliban's rule had silenced nearly every female voice. To accuse a Taliban commander so openly was considered defiance that could easily lead to death. Her video spread quickly. Within hours, clips appeared on Twitter, Facebook, and WhatsApp. Afghans inside the country whispered about it, while international activists and journalists began to share her story widely. For many women in Afghanistan, it was the first time they saw someone from inside the Taliban system speak so directly about abuse. But what looked like a step toward freedom was in fact the beginning of another nightmare. By September 2022, Taliban intelligence agents had tracked her down. They stormed into the place where she was hiding, arrested her, and dragged her into one of the secret detention centers in Kabul. These were not normal prisons where lawyers or families could visit. Instead, they were shadowy compounds run directly by Taliban intelligence, away from public oversight. Women accused of immorality, people who criticized the Taliban online, and anyone considered a political threat were taken there. Once inside, they were cut off from the world, with no official record of their arrest. Elaha's family searched desperately for her. They contacted local officials and asked for information, but the Taliban denied holding her. In reality, she had vanished into a system designed to erase people. From November 2022 until April 2023, she spent 156 days in one of these facilities. Later, when she was able to speak again, she described the horrors she faced. Guards beat her regularly, sometimes with sticks, sometimes with rifle butts. At other times, she was denied food and water for days. Interrogators tied her to chairs and shocked her with electric wires, demanding that she confess to working with foreign agents. The Taliban accused her of being part of a plot against them, simply because she had spoken out. Her health began to collapse. She lost weight rapidly. Her body weakened, and her mental state worsened under the constant abuse. Every day inside the facility felt like it could be her last. Other detainees held for speaking out against Taliban rules shared similar fates. Some were never seen again. Yet even under these conditions, Elaha held on to a small piece of hope. She refused to believe this prison would be the end of her life. That fragile hope became her strength. Somehow, in April 2023, she managed to escape Taliban custody. The exact details remain hidden, likely because revealing them could endanger others who helped her. What is known is that her escape required incredible courage, as Taliban prisons were guarded tightly, and anyone caught aiding a prisoner risked execution. When she finally broke free, it was nothing short of a miracle. She had survived months of systematic torture inside one of the most secretive arms of Taliban rule, and she had lived to tell the world what happened there. Her survival was remarkable because very few women in her position had been able to tell their stories. In most cases, the suffering of forced wives or prisoners of the Taliban stayed hidden. These women were the silent victims of a system that treated them as shadows, leaving behind scars that history may never fully uncover.